All right, so we should be live streaming now. Welcome to the Gold Institute Year in Review 2021. This is Ellie Gold, and I'm the president of the Gold Institute here in Washington, D.C., a foreign policy, national security-based think tank. It's before we get started, I think as an administrator of an institute, I think I would be remiss if I didn't begin by saying that we have 11 days to the end of the year, or I'm sorry, 8 days till the end of the year. So feel free to visit goldiis.org and support the work that we're doing. Today, I'm pleased to have we're going to have a very interesting conversation. We have a variety of Gold Institute fellows, each with a different focus area, as well as area of the globe that they focus on. And what I've asked everybody to do is provide us 2 minutes as to their thoughts on 2021. And 2 minutes as to their thoughts on 2022. Just for kicks, I would say you can in your analysis you cannot mention the word COVID, but that would make things impossible. So with that, let's start. Let's start in South Carolina with John Walsteader. John is somebody who I've been working with since probably 2010, 2011, and is somebody who has really a good sense as to what's happening in the U.S. And in particular with regards to foreign defense-related matters. But John, the floor is yours.
My 2 minutes, I can review 2021 in 2 words: bah humbug. By the way, we've got 9 days left of the year. But going beyond Scrooge, in the areas that I'm mostly watching, I made a note, and the first one I'm sorry is the pandemic, because it has put biological warfare back into the possible mix of things we can have. Basically, we had a pathogen that artificially created last year that was unleashed, allowed to get out there, and this year has been a warning on cyber war, which goes back to 2007, Russia and Estonia. Cyber war is ratcheting up. Russia, China, and more so than Iran, they're ahead of Iran. And on our side, we've got Israel that's awake, and the U.S., which is still somewhat asleep. EMP threats are multiplying, and we hypersonic. We are way behind China and Russia. We're talking; they're actually developing things. But another threat has emerged of conventional mini munitions. These were used against Saudi's oil fields. And what it shows is an escalating threat envelope. If you can take out one small part of the Saudi oil fields and cut their production in half for $98.11, it creates a very serious threat envelope in that did not exist even a couple of years ago. Those are the things. Beyond that, I quickly say the biggest problem for 2022 is the same one we had this year, and that's the administration. We have an administration where we have a president who is physically frail and mentally impaired, and the one thing Democrats and Republicans could agree upon is he's still infinitely preferable to our vice president, who is a cackling cipher and knows nothing about anything. And that really, for my friends overseas, that's the thing you have to worry about most. And what you have to do is do a lot of talking to them and say, hey, listen, you've got to pay attention to this. It's an uphill battle. Israel's been trying to do it. And you can't do enough of that. We are sitting there with threats that the administration is not prepared to meet, and our adversaries know it. Putin knows we're not going to do enough with Ukraine. We'd have to get them major arms, combat aircraft and things. to really stop an invasion. All we can do is if we send them the stuff we're sending them, it'll raise the cost of it, but Putin can move if he wants to. We haven't sent troops anywhere. We should have tripwires in the three Baltics. That would prevent Putin from going in there. He doesn't want a war with us. And if he does go in there and we're not prepared to stop it, NATO is hollowed out overnight. So are all our alliances around the world. Jake Sullivan is trying to talk the Israelis into things he thinks are more important than the Abraham Accords. I'm optimistic Israel will tell them to take a hike because they are over there and they know what's going on. With the Chinese, they might decide when Putin's doing something we're distracted to make a move of some sorts on Taiwan. I wouldn't say an outright invasion. They probably don't have the force put together to do that or any kind of combined operations, but they could ratchet up a lot of pressure there, some sort of a blockade or something, and we can't project enough power in that area, much less than we can in Europe. We can't project power over there like in 1996 the Clinton administration could do with 2 carriers. And every simulation, the Chinese know this, that we've run about 12.5 simulations of war, we lose every one. So, this is year 2 of 4 years nail biting. And one last quick thought. If there is a major reversal in the elections and both houses go to the Republicans, that'll create a threat window where they might decide to act before the Republicans get in to make Biden maybe do a little bit more, particularly if a lot of Democrats, moderate ones, would look at those results and say, hey, we're not going to be around long if we don't move a little closer to the center. So that's a quick run.
Excellent. Thank you, John. Let's move on. But as you're talking, and you as John refers to our fellows from across the pond, why don't we go to Jeffrey Van Orden, who is a distinguished fellow at the Gold Institute and is in the UK. And why don't we ask you to comment? I know that John gave you a lot to think about, but let's hear your thoughts.
Yeah, good afternoon. Good to see you all. John, of course, is very wise. Can you hear me okay, by
Yes.
the way? Yeah, all right, yeah. Yeah, I mean, just looking back over the year, I mean, obviously, the big issues like climate change and the pandemic have such enormous consequences, almost beyond our sort of grasp for this institute at the moment. Migration as well, I think, is another of these big issues which we've yet to find a way of properly dealing with. I mean, it's estimated there are something like 84 million displaced persons in the world at the moment, and probably millions of others who, of course, would much prefer to come and live in our countries than somewhere else. But I suppose the thing that's troubled me most, because somehow or other one absorbs all these bigger things, but what's troubled me most is what I would call the retreat of the West, the internal assault on our own values, our history, our institutions that's going on in so many of our countries. We see this through the whole cancelling culture, this whole woke agenda that we have. And of course, not only does it feed off itself, but of course it's provoked and encouraged by external forces that aren't well disposed towards us. Inevitably linked to this is what I would call the decline of the United States, the downgrading of United States influence globally, the fact that nobody really takes any notice much more what the United States now says it's going to do or whatever. It seems to have been overtaken and influenced by others that can dispose of more readily of resources and even among undesirable regimes, but they can turn to those other sources and find what they want. The decline of US influence we put down to many, many factors, some of which I think John has touched on. I mean, I have to say, you know, as a foreigner, you can't just put this down to the new administration in Washington. I have to say that from our point of view, that whole assault on the Capitol, which happened at the end of the last administration, was a most disgraceful episode. And it was sort of emblematic, if you like, of the decay that's gone on. We've really got to recover ourselves and restore confidence in ourselves again. And my great plea, and one of the things I've written about a bit over this last few months, is this whole question of the unity of the West. We are so absorbed in our own internal, quite petty battles at the moment. And these bigger things are going on in the real world outside, which we're not properly addressing. And instead of spirit, and we've seen, by the way, what happens when there is disunity. You know, one could argue that, for example, the first Gulf War need never have happened had there been real unity in the West. And I'm talking here about continental European countries that pursued their own advantage and sent, therefore, the wrong sort of messages to Saddam at the time, which meant that he thought the whole West was divided and there wasn't any resolve to deal with him, and therefore he went ahead with his designs. That was one recent example. The danger is now that, again, we're all beset with our own little agendas. So the European Union, still so obsessed with its idea of strategic autonomy at a time when it has, of course, no military forces at its disposal, different to those that are available to NATO. The European Union is not a military power, and the more it tries to separate itself from the other countries of the non-EU, the more dangerous that becomes. And of course, Russia would like nothing better than to separate continental Europe and the United States and the United Kingdom and so on. But whereas what we need is unity. So instead of the United States just going along meekly with this European Union agenda, they should actually be saying to the European Union, we don't like this separate agenda that you have. We don't like the hostility towards the United Kingdom that seems to be innate in many of your institutions. We need to rebuild unity because there is a far greater threat out there that affects us all. Now, I mean, there are many other things which have concerned us in the year, the whole Iran nuclear program, this question of the strategic domination of space, new weapons, which John has already touched on, many, many areas of concern. I mean, the public have enough on their plates at the moment, worrying with deep anxiety about the pandemic and all the rest of it, without adding to it. So it behoves those of us that are engaged in the whole strategic business, if you like, to put our minds together and try and come up with solutions which are beyond partisan solutions. I'll stop there. I mean, we have our own problems in the UK at the moment. Well, I won't bore you with all those.
Well, I'm very interested to hear if you can give us 30 seconds about the UK. The Gold Institute, as you're aware, and I talk to the general public. The Gold Institute, as you're aware, is a Western institution. It's not a U.S. institution. Our headquarters is based in Washington, D.C., but that's why we have fellows from Spain and from the Netherlands and from the UK, as well as Israel and Kurdistan as well. So give us a sense as to what's happening in Europe. I mean, specifically, without the lens of the United States.
Yeah, well, I mean, in the United Kingdom, and let me just talk about that.
Precisely.
I mean, I think there's even among conservative supporters of our government, there's great concern at the moment at the loss of trust and confidence in government. It is too easy, and we've seen this in previous British administrations, that once you get into a sort of sequence of criticisms of so-called sleaze and not taking seriously, being caught on the hop in a number of major policy areas, not seem to have a grip on things. So we have, at the moment, we have rising inflation. The lack of trust immediately derives from the fact that we had a former distinguished member of parliament and minister who was doing things he shouldn't have been doing. Let me put it no more strongly than that. He was abusing his position. And because he was a chum of certain people, and I know the man concerned as well, and he's a good chap over many years, and I've known him. But he abused his position, and instead of dealing with that robustly, there was an attempt to change the rules, the oversight that goes on in the House of Commons, and that fell flat. That alarms the media and therefore the general public, if you like. The MP concerned had to resign his seat. There was then an unnecessary by-election, which we lost. And we're talking about a seat in the conservative heartlands of England, a seat where there was a 23,000 vote majority, which has now been taken by the Liberal Democrats. Now, these things happen in by-elections, but in a way, it was again emblematic, I think, of this crisis of trust and confidence. So that's sort of where we're ending the year, unfortunately. And there also appears to be a lot of lack of clarity over handling the pandemic at the moment, which again adds to the lack of confidence. So we're not ending the year on a good note, I have to say. On the continent, as you know, we've got a new administration in Germany. It remains to be seen how that's going to work out. Macron is seeking re-election in France as president, and so on. The pandemic, a lot of harsh measures are being taken across the continent on this. Things generally are not in a very happy state, I would say, at the moment.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Let's come back home here, and let me throw it to our media fellow Neil McCabe. Neil, I'm pleased that you're joining us today. Let's throw this to you. Let's talk about what's going on here back at home.
Yeah, I think that when I look back on 2021, I was very curious to see how the new administration would handle policies that the Trump administration had put forward, because as we all know, as much as new presidents start new policies, so many of Reagan's policies were continuations of Carter policies, and so many, Clinton picked up a lot of stuff that Bush did, and George W. Bush was picking up a lot of stuff that Clinton did. There's sort of a passing back and forth, as the tide shifts. You're not sure if the tide's going in or going out, which administration is calling the shots. I was looking at Iran, China, and Russia. And I think that coming into power, the Biden administration wanted to make bold steps or even pivots. And they've been thwarted in different ways. They've been able to do sort of side deals, and they've been able to do little things, but they haven't been able to execute the big pivots on policy that I think they expected. And I think that they're sort of stuck in gear as they await the midterms, and the midterms are hanging over them like the sort of Damocles. And I think that that's where the Biden administration is really stuck right now. To sort of go back to my lane, the media, what we saw in the beginning of the Biden administration as we opened 2021, we saw the media do, sort of execute what I was calling ice cream journalism, where Biden, not only could Biden do no wrong, these people who are, yapping at and arguing and interrupting Trump for 4 years, they would just stand there patiently watching Biden order ice cream, then ask him, what flavor did you order, Mr. President? And he'd say whatever his flavor was, and he'd say, thank you, sir. And then if you go back and Google Valentine's Day coverage, right? And it's just full of all these stories in People magazine, Time magazine, the Washington Post, the true love of Jill and Joe Biden. Isn't it amazing that this loving, wonderful, romantic couple is now in the White House? That all changed at the fall of Kabul. The fall of Kabul is Biden's Katrina. There is no way he can flank it, flip it, turn it, spin it. There is no escape from Kabul. And he may be president for another 7 years, but he is forever wounded by Kabul. And I think it's affected everything. And then going back to the media, it affected the media coverage. And you're now seeing the media sort of struggle of how do we represent this guy that we foisted on the American people. We lied to the American people. We contributed. However you want to characterize how the election of 2020 was handled, there were rules that were changed and there were procedures that were done, and that 2020 is an election in question. However, there are different gradations of how that is, but the press contributed to how the 2020 campaign was sort of handled. And also, if you even dared to question, if you even asked questions about the 2020 campaign, of course, you're evil, you're traitorous. Gore could take the 2000 campaign to the Supreme Court. That was fine. 2004, they voted to the Democrats tried to decertify the Ohio results, but this was fine. We all know this. However, as the media struggles to, on one hand, sort of support Biden, they still have to acknowledge that this is an administration that is failing. It is incompetent. It is not honest. It's disingenuous, and we see it now in the press coverage that the reporters are starting to and continuing to be very aggressive. There's a guy named Neil Monroe who was the White House reporter for the Daily Caller. My friend Neil Monroe is the only man, I'm pretty sure of this, he's the only man in 8 years, or the only reporter in 8 years, who interrupted interrupted Obama. Obama tried to Obama would give these 20-minute answers to questions. He'd take you down Tobacco Road and sort of run out the clock on his press conferences. Neil interrupted him. He was called out for it. And he works for the Daily Caller, which is a hardcore right-wing media site. And they, in essence, they fired him for interrupting Obama. And then you compare that with what was happening with Trump. And now you're starting to see this in the Biden administration, not so much with Biden himself, but because the White House staff will not allow him to take questions. They're shielding him, for all of his sins. Trump would spend, more than an hour with reporters. There isn't a president in the history of America, the history of the world, who spent as much time with reporters, answering questions all the time. Biden is completely cloistered now. They're treating him like he's like a zombie Diocletian, who's like, held back in his chambers. I think going into 2022, we're going to have to see how the media resolves how they're going to cover this, because the media runs this country. The media is more powerful than the government. The media decides who the president is. The media decides what legislation gets passed. And so the media is so influential right now, and they have turned on Biden, but they certainly don't want the return of Trump, and they certainly don't want to affect an agenda that the media is personally invested in. And so we'll watch to see. For instance, I think Roe v. Wade is in terrific trouble, and this is creating great consternation with the media, and they're struggling with that. And then, of course, overseas, I just want to point out that in 2017, I thought that going into 2017, I was concerned about a war in North Korea, the Baltics, and Ukraine. And going into 2022, I'm concerned about a war in Ukraine and Taiwan. And then, of course, we still have to resolve Pakistan and Turkey, which are two topics that the Gold Institute addressed in 2021, and I hope will continue to address in 2022. And I know I blew my time, Eli, I'm sorry.
Excellent. Thank you. And yes, we are going to continue our work, and thank you for spotlighting that as well. Let's go. Let's head overseas again. And if I may, I want to invite our distinguished fellow, member of European Parliament representing Spain, Herman Tersch, to give us his thoughts on the past, on the current year, and the future. Herman.
Hello, Ellie. Hello to everybody. Nice to see you. Well, it has been a very difficult year. It started with you have referred to the drama in Washington, the decline, and then I would say the degradation in this new administration, where we are all are very buffed, I would say, of seeing how things work now. And we are having only unpleasant surprises, if not surprises, because many were fearing it, but it's really disgraceful what we hear from the United States. And we are seeing very worrisome movements all over the places. We are seeing in the European Union really a kind of ideological crusade of the social democrats, of the left, against every kind of free thinking and free speaking and free acting on the sovereignty of the countries inside the European Union. And what is happening with Poland and with Hungary is absolutely obnoxious. It's appalling the way the Commission is treating these two members. Some others are starting to be bullied as well, like Slovenia. But seeing what and they leave completely besides countries which are really violating every law and every common sense in democracy, and acting I would say, almost violently against the judges and against the law, like the Spanish leftist government with the communists inside. And there we have this absolutely terrifying connection from the Spanish government to all these narco-communist regimes that are in this moment in an offensive in the whole continent. They have three elections, one after the other: Peru, Honduras, and now Chile. Have been ended with a victory, very, very questionable victories, all of them. But it's a fact that we have now governments of the far left, with all of them extremely intensely connected to Cuba and to Venezuela, with the FARC, with the Colombian narco terrorist groups, which have been now put outside the list of terrorist groups by the Washington administration, which is really absolutely incredible. What is the harmful movement that we're hearing from the department, from the State Department towards Latin America is disgraceful what we hear, and it's becoming a very dangerous place. And we have only, let's say, of the major places in major states in Latin America, we have Colombia and Ecuador, the little Ecuador up there, very fragile. And then we have Colombia and Brazil. I was in Brazil last week. I was in Colombia. I have been in Colombia several times in this last 2 months. And they are also absolutely worried because we are going to see the same scenery in this year, in the next year, where they both are confronting elections in October, Brazil, before that Colombia. So as I say, if Colombia and Brazil take the same path as the others, we will have a lost continent for the West. It will be a completely lost continent for the West. The cocaine cartels of Mexico will have all the allies in the whole continent, and the people in the United States who think that it's not their problem what is happening in South America in this moment, going to have a really, really nasty surprise. I fear with that. And in Europe, as I say, it's difficult with all these movements because of the COVID. It's difficult. Some countries are recovering a little bit, others not. But we have a very bad news from Germany. The government of Germany is going to be as prepotent as we hardly have seen since 45. If you hear the tone that they have, the socialists and the Greens, which control completely the government. The liberals are really put by sides. They have the economy ministry, but they won't have any political weight in this government. And if you hear the socialists, radicalized socialists and radicalized Greens, because Merkel has, all these years, Merkel has been shifting to the left, as with taking all the Christian Democrats to the social democracy, and has pushed to the far left the other parties with enormous difficult results for everybody in this year. We will see they are getting. There are national reactions in defense of sovereignty, and so you see that the people like the German government, new government, which says, and hear it, they say it's an historical task of Germany to take the European Union to this federation, where we have overcome the nation statehood. I mean, if you hear this kind of things in German, you would, it's quite appalling sensation. And we are seeing that there. We are seeing that the commission is, as I say, bullying everybody who wants to have a conservative policy inside, even against the treaties. There's no treaty who says that the commission has any competence whatsoever over the education in Poland and in Hungary. But the commission and their whole social democratic hegemony inside the European Union and the whole press, their whole media, are attacking these countries because they want to impose a progressive agenda in the schools in Poland and in Hungary and in Slovenia and everywhere else, which is absolutely, as I say, by no means justified by the European treaties, which are being violated openly. I leave it there. As you see, there are a bunch of problems.
Thank you, Herman. I'm just putting this out there for everybody. I'm going at the end of this, after everybody has their opportunity to speak, I'm going to limit it and get to 45 seconds on the stopwatch. I'm going to ask everybody for one positive outlook towards 2022. So I would hate to end our call without on such a lugubrious note. What I'm going to do, I'm going to shift this over to Mark Black. Mark, you've heard some of Herman's thoughts on what's going on in Germany and Europe now. Come on, man, give me something good, some good news here, at least from New York. Anyway, no. In all seriousness, Mark Black is one of our law enforcement fellows, and I look forward to hearing from you as well. Here, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ellie. Good morning or good afternoon, everybody. Well, Ellie, unfortunately, we see a lot of spillage from defund the police movement from 2020 into 2021. And that's pretty much my lane, having been retired NYPD and a detective with NYPD, looking at policing in the United States and still being in contact with that community as well. And looking how policing also is trying to challenge the anti-Semitism that is actually rising. And we see how it's actually affected the Jewish community and the challenges that poses on how to protect the Jewish community through law enforcement. But first, on the defund the police movement, let's call a spade here. It was successful. It was never about taking the money, the budgets away from the independent commands, the police commands. What it really was about manpower. And unfortunately, it's going to take several decades to get that manpower up to snuff in many ways. The first way is basically dealing with retention rates and how we're going to backfill all those who, for instance, in NYPD, I think we're into the thousands right now, close to like 7,000, something in around that ballpark that actually just got up and left. It might even be more now. And that's not just guys and gals who are at their retirement, where they put their time in. It's also just people who picked up and left and had enough. So the challenge going forward now is how are we going to replenish those ranks and files across the United States? And unfortunately, policing being a vocation right now, no one is looking to really go into it. So there's going to be some challenges. The other thing is some of the important challenges from a micro perspective with the individual departments is when you have mass exits of trained personnel, you lose that mentorship. And what I'm hearing from a lot of, I still train law enforcement. I still go to various states and do some instructing. You're starting to see a younger and younger group of police officers. The job now, you might want to say, is become very young. And with that becomes a lack of experience from the streets. And what I mean by that is if you had a mentor and everybody retires, everybody's replaceable, But the thing that's affecting policing is when one leaves and learns the vocation from a mentor, they have a certain insight and a certain perspective of how the job has to be done. So we have that, which is really going to be a challenge for many states. And how are we going to replenish the ranks? How are we going to make policing look attractive for those to go into the vocation? But there's something else. It's not just about people go, oh, Eric Adams made it into New York, things are going to change. Well, yeah, Eric Adams might be in New York, but did the city council change? And I'm listening to all the pundits on TV, and then I'm listening to my friends. Okay, the commissioner changed, but the attitude of the city councils aren't changing. So they're still right where they were. The morale is still going to be low because their hands are still going to be tied because the police commissioner gets the direction in most states, in most municipalities, from the mayor's office or from the governor's office. So if there isn't a change on these city councils, you're not going to see a dramatic change in policing. Because the way that the psychology of the police officer, that guy or gal who's working the streets, working the investigations, they're still not going to have confidence because the systemic structure has not changed for them. So you still have a morale problem, which then brings me to the point of anti-Semitism and how's policing going to counter that? And something very interesting happened back in May when Hamas was going after Israel, which spilled over here in the United States. And I brought this up with Ellie before when we had one of our panel discussions. Because of the Fund the Police movement, a lot of our law enforcement's hands were tied. So when we saw these protesters, BLM, the anarchists, people, police weren't engaging as they would have engaged before, which then gave these protesters, the aggressive protesters, saying, oh, no consequences. All of a sudden now we see what happened back in May with Hamas and the Israeli conflict. And then we see the Palestinian groups in the United States, Palestinians starting to attack some people in the Jewish community. What had happened was that there was a domino effect. These Palestinian groups looked back and saw, oh, nothing, there was no real police crackdown with the violent riots that we saw in Portland or in New York City. Let's do it. And then that spilt over. So this whole dichotomy, foreign things that happen overseas will happen here domestically, will not just happen in our own little communities, will spread out through the United States. Policing now it has a lot of challenges. The other challenges within policing, and this is a social economic challenge, we see a major shift in the United States from heavily taxed states, such where I live in New York or the Northeast, and people migrating to the South, not only Florida, but we see it starting to happen in the Deep South or in Texas. A lot of these communities now, which are trying to deal, well, how do we build up our police forces? I mean, not only the critical infrastructure, you have to add more schools, but now you have to have more police to police these communities. And since policing is not a vocation that's really looked at today as one wants to go into, because a lot of young people saw the backlash, they have challenges now. And that's going to be going into the next, I don't even say the next few years. This is going to be something that's going to take a couple of decades to correct itself. Those are going to be the challenges for the local municipalities to deal with. How are we going to support our police? How are we going to make the vocation of policing one that somebody really wants that calling to go into? And then from the Jewish community is where we're seeing the uptick in the anti-Semitism and some of the attacks. But now that the manpower is low in a lot of the policing community, there's still service to calls that they have to do. Where's the protection coming from? So this is a long-term challenge, and it means a systemic change it starts locally. It really does start locally, like all politics is local, all policing is local. So how are these police chiefs and police commissioners going to change the mindset of the local community to get better support from the city councils and try to build up the manpower and have better retention rates going forward.
Yes or no answer? Are you optimistic for the future, or in this realm, or not?
Short term, no. I know, because I speak to police all over the United States. People are leaving in droves, and it doesn't matter what top management wants. You need the worker bees to complete the work, and no one's coming on. So there's a shortage of manpower. Long term, like everything else, it will correct itself.
Excellent. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks for the good news, Mark.
Let us move over to a media fellow of ours, Adele Nazarian. Adele, the floor is yours once I add you. There we go.
Thank you so much. And thanks, Neil, for always putting a smile on everyone's faces. Thank you so much for everyone for all of your remarks. I will be very brief. And I have to say that it's definitely difficult to have an optimistic purview considering the multitude of problems that have surfaced over the past year in particular. But, in terms of the culture wars we're facing, the economic and militaristic and cyber wars that we're in the midst of on multiple fronts, America's strategic withdrawal from the world stage, which has left our partners and allies in a position where there is an undoubtedly a lack of trust that must be rebuilt. And also economically, with the rates, for example, something so simple as gas is 55% higher than it was a year ago. And inflation, and of course, the Fed raising rates by 3 times actually in the next year. From the media purview, I do see a definite shift. There's a lack of I think accountability, and I think that's been a progressive and consistent theme over the last decade. And with the advent and heavy use of social media and so quote unquote citizen journalism, which allows for more mainstream everyday individuals to pronounce their views in a public forum, many different public forums. You have 4chan discourse, Discord, Twitter, Reddit, Facebook, all these different platforms where people are able to get that people consider to be more of a news source than the typical mainstream outlets that were really the only ones available previously. There is a rising up. I think these I'm going to talk about it, I'm sorry, but vaccine mandates are definitely a global demonstration in the overreach of power and a violation of, by American standards, the First Amendment. Of course, it's important to be safe and free, but in principle, there has to be a level of choice, and people have to be able to make a choice for themselves based on what they feel is best for their own bottom line. That said, I do believe that I'll just focus for a second on South Asia. I think that South Asia is going to be extremely important national security wise. The Pakistan and India element, along with China, of course, the fall of Kabul and the takeover by the illegitimate government of the Taliban in Afghanistan only plays into the hands of the Pakistanis and by extension, Iran. And we can see the disaster that can ensue based on how this current administration will handle their intended re-entry into the nuclear deal. And all that said, I will say that 2022 is going to be a pivotal year. It's going to be the year that's going to either make or break and set the cadence for the next 10 years, in my opinion. So it is going to be a moment where anyone that is dissatisfied in America, throughout the world, has an opportunity to really rise up, not violently, but with their voices, and to truly use the power of the pen, the power of intellect, and the power of logic and common sense to voice their opposition to anything they are opposed to, and to use their vote and where it is available, and to make an impact. Because I think, I'm not quoting it correctly, but I think there's something along the lines of, those who are silent are complicit and just as guilty of carrying out a crime. And so it's time to speak up. And I do think that I have a gilded optimism, a kind of shaded optimism that's guarded. But I really do believe that this next year, 2022, will determine whether or not we're able to actually take back, for America at least, the original vision of our founding fathers, and to hopefully not steer too much further away from what that original ethos was for all the people. And I will also add, it is going to be a very important time also to examine the introduction of digital assets and cryptocurrencies into our financial ecosystem, because clearly the US dollar has been shrinking in its valuation. And I think that it's important that the US dollar does continue to remain a reserve asset. And I just got a notification, sorry. And so that said, I will leave us all with this, but I am so honored to be part of this incredible organization, the Gold Institute. And thank you, Ellie, for bringing together such incredible minds and wonderful people. That's what it's about, being good people. And that's something you don't really see in today's day and age. So hats off to you and to everyone here.
Thank you, Adele. Thank you. It's great having you as part of the team. Absolutely. So let's move on. Let's move across the globe. Let's Naro Zagros. Naro is one of our senior fellows based in Kurdistan region of Iraq. And Naro, let's hear what's going on in your part of the world.
Thanks, Ellie, and thanks everyone. Good to see you all. Well, we started the year with some sense of optimism when we realized that a new administration is forming in Washington that could rectify the problems that was made by the previous administration. But it turned out to be absolutely wrong, and we are left with more chaos and lack of strategic planning by this administration at the moment. That led to it created a sense of disillusionment with American allies in the region, not just in Iraq and Kurdistan, but in the region, especially after the withdrawal of Americans in Afghanistan. This complete chaos and fiasco, it could also happen in Iraq and in other places in the Middle East. So American allies are worried that they will be left behind by the current government sometime soon. And then the rise of ISIS again, the resurgence of ISIS is happening in the region, not just in Iraq, but also in Syria and in other places. And then Turkish, Lebanese, and Iranian currency devalued, more than half, more than 60% of their values since the beginning of the year. All of this have led to the influx of people and migration and internally displaced people in the region. In the Iraqi Kurdistan, for example, it's a small country with 5 million people. It's the smallest. It's much smaller than the size of Yorkshire in England, and we host about 1.3 million IDPs and refugees in the region right now. And then in Iraq, we had an election which was by far the cleanest election we've had in history, and yet it created chaos among people who won the election and also among those who lost the election. unfortunately, people who lost the election are militias where they have money and they have weapons. So there is no government in Iraq right now, and it's going to be very difficult to form a government this time in Iraq. And I think this year will be a huge challenge for Iraq. And like other places in the Middle East, for Iraq, it's either make or break this time. And the only good thing that happened in the region in the past 4 or 5 months is the price of oil has gone up, which is helping those countries who depend on exporting oil in the region, like Iraq, like other Saudi Arabia and others. So this is the only good thing. Other than that, there is more chaos here. There is more sense of confusion. More people are leaving their homes, and COVID is it's not the priority, it's concern for people. War is the priority. The main thing that people are worried about is war in this region. And I don't see a brighter, um, Middle East in this year coming, and I think it's going to be very challenging. So we will see clashes between people, and also the rise of hardliners in Iran taking power in Iran after the election. It's another worry that we have here in the Middle East. If you ask me for positive thing about the year coming, just hoping that there will be no war. But I am cautiously saying that I think it's going to be very challenging, and a war is imminent, unfortunately.
Thank you, Naru. Let me jump back in here. All right. So, is there are the Abraham Accords and the quote unquote normalizations with Israel, is that helpful to Kurdistan or no impact?
We had a meeting set up by some Arab Iraqi scholars and politicians to normalize relations between Iraq and Israel, which was, again, because it was ill-informed and very badly organized, it turned out to be a bad conference. And there is no way that Iraq is able to normalize relations with Israel, not like what we see with the Emiratis and Bahrainis and the Qataris. Iraq is way behind. In fact, it's going backwards. It's becoming more. The country is in the hands of militias. While they have no votes in the country, they lost the votes in the election, but they are the ones who are running the country in Iraq. And an anti-Iranian alliance is forming in the region, mainly between Israel, Saudi Arabia, Emirates, and Qatar, and all others. But Iran is becoming more powerful now and more united with the hardliners in charge. And this trust that America is trying to uh, put to the new administration in Iran, I think it worries American allies in the region. Iran is becoming sort of admitted to the international arena because of America wants to do it, and that's a big worry. And bearing in mind, in the past year, there's been more attacks on American soldiers and American bases in Iraq, mainly created and orchestrated by militias who are aligned to Iran than ever. And yet, we see nothing from the press in the United States about this fact. And we see America's trying to normalize relations with Iran. And I don't know whether this is something that they want to do. Actually, they want to do, or something that they are. It's a game they are playing at. I don't know.
Thank you for your thoughts, Naro. Let's move to Israel with Ellie Stern, and then we will come back to the United States with Larry Cunningham, and then I will give some thoughts myself. Ellie, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much. Pleasure to be with you all this evening. I hope that each and every one of you are safe and life as well. And I will tell you that there's a lot that I would love to speak with you all regarding my research and the work that I'm doing. But at this point, some of it is extremely sensitive and confidential. So I will, not be able to fully engage with that in this forum. But I will cover some of the work that I do on a general basis. So I don't think I've had the opportunity to introduce myself to all of you. I don't remember if we've all spoken, but I recognize a lot of faces on this call. I used to work for the Congress. I'm a national security analyst. I have studied at 4 universities in 3 countries. I'm an investigator, I'm a researcher. I do a lot of research. I deal with national security issues. I deal with non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. I also deal with commercial versions of that issue as well, and then also in the other portfolio of dealing with biological weapons. And that's where my research focus is in national security.
Ellie
is
a most important senior fellow at the Gold Institute that I've been working with for about 6 or 7 years now. When we met when Ellie was in Congress, working for actually a distinguished fellow of ours, Congressman Trent Franks. So, and now Ellie is our fellow resident residing in Israel. Just jumped in there.
Yes.
The floor is yours.
Yeah. So Ellie, so we've worked really close together, and I think that's where we've been very effective in our work together on the Hill, especially as it pertains to U.S. national security interests. And when Ellie put this group together, this was a no-brainer. I mean, this was a field that I had come from being a student in Germany. I had studied European relations. I had done the master's in Dusseldorf, and so I had done a lot of training in EU law, EU policy, EU integration. Very familiarized with the European system and European issues. And when there was this idea that we could create this transatlantic network and put experts together and discuss the international issues which affect the Western democracy and Western civilization, this was a really great idea. So I feel privileged to be part of this forum. But I will tell you, and specifically, I will speak that I think right now the world is going through an incredible transition with national security issues. I think to the top of that is really this disguise of what is still happening with COVID. I have come to the conclusion, especially what I am observing, is that the Chinese virus effectively has been exported and globalized as a socialism factor for the Chinese government. And I think what we're witnessing right now across the board in Israel, in Western European states, in the United States, is socialism. I mean, I love my countries. I adore them. I have tremendous respect for those who have come before me and have fought blood-earned freedoms, but to relinquish blood-earned freedoms for a virus that 99+% survive, I think is definitely a huge question of where we're going. I think that we need to do everything to protect the vulnerable. That is without question. But we have to understand that there are incredible issues that are going on behind the scenes with this COVID policy, and there is a lot of sinister and nefarious actors and people involved with agendas. And this is not a conspiracy theory. This is a conspiracy reality. And I think that the sooner we wake up and address this issue and focus on, protecting the vulnerable and normalizing society again, we can get back to where we were before. And I'll give you an example. I am seeing lawmakers and policy people who do not understand secondary death from COVID, that if you change a macroeconomic lever, And you can call it, a restriction when it's a fiat. You can say that it's a lockdown when it's home incarceration. But when you lock down people, you are killing them. You are killing them from suicide. You are killing them from poverty. You are killing them from starvation. So while you might be thinking that you might be stopping, quote unquote, a spread, you are causing so much more damage and so much more devastation to those who are very vulnerable. I mean, in my country here, we're almost at a quarter of households that are almost slipping into poverty. I mean, thousands and thousands of families are living in adjunct poverty, not able to feed themselves. And you can imagine how this has impacted the developing world in countries that are not as advanced as we are. How are they performing with these draconian policies that have been implemented by unaccountable bureaucrats, people who absolutely have no accountability, that you can't call them, you can't question them, you're not allowed to actively engage in them. And if you question the science, that's heresy. And so I was brought up, I mean, I'm a big fan of science, I'm very pro-science. I was brought up that everything in science can be questioned, that everything in science is supposed to be transparent, that everything's supposed to follow a scientific method. I mean, it is third grade, the scientific method. It is not that complicated. But apparently, when it comes to the current issues that we're facing today, somehow that just got lost along the way. And, it's just not a matter of it being science, it's that we're driven by, enacting everything we do by fear. And I think that is what I'm seeing here in Israel. I am seeing that in the United
Are you
States.
positive about, are you optimistic for 2022, or are you going down a path that can't come back from?
Well, I think at the end of the day, there is enormous fraud that has been committed, scientific fraud, enormous issues that have been concealed from the public for many, many, many years right now, because people do not read. And at the same time, if you bring up the question or the issue of vaccines, you have to understand something, that the public, the lawmakers, the judges, the officials do not understand the difference between the concept of the vaccine and the reality of the vaccine. There are two different worlds. And that is what is happening right now in the United States. Right now in the United States, you have 20,000 dead in VAERS. You have 1 million adverse events. And then what we know about vaccine injury is less than 1% is reported. Less than 1%. So we're talking about the potential of 250,000 deaths from an experimental product without any absolutely long-term safety data. Nothing. And anyone that questions it, they lose their job. They are not able to feed their families. They are coerced into taking this product. I think that is absolutely wrong. I have no hesitation to stand up for that. I have absolutely no fear of standing up for that. I think everyone should have a choice. Everyone has to have an informed view. And I think people particularly need to have an informed view right now about whether they want to live under socialism, whether they want to adopt a socialist doctrine as their way of life. Because I'll tell you something, right now, I have now been designated as having, the United States as a red country, and as a dual Israeli-American citizen, I cannot even travel to the United States. I can't travel to the United States. I can travel if I had an 80-year-old parent. But why is it 80 years old? Isn't that socialism? Did the Israeli government not know that the average life expectancy of a male in the United States is 74.4 years of age? But apparently, if my father is not 80 years of age, I can't go and see him. So when people say, that's just a restriction, no, that's a fiat. That's socialism. That's what socialism looks like. That's how socialism comes, that there's absolutely no logic, there's no explanation, there's no rationale for any of these policies, and we are losing control. We are losing control out of fear. And we have to understand where that is coming from. And I don't want to live like this. I don't want to hand over this to my child. I don't want the blood-earned freedoms that everyone that came before me, including myself, I served in the IDF, all right? I am saying that as a person who has fought and done everything I can to be able to defend human freedom, including serving in the United States Congress. So I'm not saying this as somebody who is, has any disrespect to the Israeli people or to the Israeli government. But apparently there is something incredibly wrong right now that is happening in Western states. And I do believe it is a lack of education. It is a lack of understanding of policy. It is a lack of understanding virology. I mean, the entire public and the entire lawmakers that I deal with on a daily basis have a monolithic view of viruses and infectious disease. They see infectious disease, every infectious disease, whether it's rabies or whether it's flu or it's COVID, monolithically. So a disease like rabies that kills 100% is in the same category mentally for most people as COVID. You have to understand that there is something wrong with that picture. So we have something going on right now that I think it is incredibly, incredibly alarming, that there is a level of ignorance, and some of it is willful ignorance for that matter, with many of the people that we have elected, that they are unwilling to listen. And I cannot believe that people will elect people that won't listen to them, will not listen to their problems, will not hear their problems. How do we send people to parliaments and to congresses who are unaccountable, who are unwilling to hold hearings over these issues? We still have not had a proper hearing over this virus being released from a lab in Wuhan. And you have to ask yourself, why? What is the problem with being able to engage the issue?
Why can't we understand? Ellie, this is something I think that we're going to have to engage further on after the new year. I think that this idea of the rise in global socialism is something that we're going to have to talk about. And no doubt the COVID is certainly the beginning of this conspicuous move towards socialism. Thank you for joining us, Ellie. I just want to move on. The hour's getting late. We have Larry Cunningham. Larry is also a law enforcement fellow at the Gold Institute. Larry, the floor is yours.
Well, greetings, everyone. This is one of my wonderful post-retirement engagements. I see myself coming together with all these thoughts that kind of solidify everything I've learned, but take it to the next level. So I'm honored to be with such great insights and forward creative thinkers. And everything you've identified, in my view, is basically a result of our education system. Folks can't discriminate. I mean, they can't think critically. They can't think creatively. I taught recently a course for about a year to intelligence analysts, and the titles of them were Creative Thinking Analytic Methods, and the other was Practical Intelligence Writing and Briefing. And it struck me how poorly, what a poor job we do in our education system to get to those places. And so much of what you've identified is a result of that. I'm also reminded, I was given a book recently, and I gave it to a friend of mine, actually a cousin of mine who teaches at West Point, and it's called Physics for Presidents, and some basic concepts that is just beyond their capability, beyond their education, which they really need to go back to school. And Ellie talked about third grade. Honestly, I think it's almost that basic. But anyway, getting to the point, many of the problems and issues you've identified, I think all of you, are the result of the breathless and impulsive reversal of anything Trump by this current administration. It's just tragic because it's Trump's, it's bad. And I don't know what the calculation is, but I guess like they felt that the short-term gain of this elimination of logical things was going to get them something that they could hang their hat on and maybe pass through all these policies that they want to. But it just strikes me as being such an irresponsible, short-lived view and a short-lived policy that it scares me. Anyway, they've done this without any appreciation for context, history, and most importantly, the results of what they're doing. I mean, do you realize what you're doing? You're going to get a short-term segment on the news by the mainstream media, but long-term, you're hurting us, the country, but you're hurting yourselves too. And that's the part that I struggle with. So I view this as one of our big problems. The other problem is some of these blatant disregards for normal, logical things are sugar-coated by the mainstream media. Things that are obviously wrong and obviously detrimental are just kind of sugar-coated, overlooked, or explained away in a way that doesn't pass the smell test. And of course, among the most egregious, of course, in my view, is the defunding of the police. And now it's interesting to see that the success of the media sugarcoat a lot of this is successful up to a point. Now they're seeing that they can't sugarcoat this. our leaders are forced to address these things head on. And they're making the effort to say, well, it was a problem there. We miscalculated a little bit, but now we have to start looking at this seriously. So in terms of positive things, I think this forced appreciation, this forced reversal in some of their thoughts may be a silver lining. It's certainly all these reversals in Trump's policies, and not all were great, of course, but some of the obvious ones maybe, as many of you alluded to, hurt our credibility across the country and across the world. And so my hope here is that with all that, efforts like ours give us an opportunity to maybe reverse this course a little bit. I'm pessimistic in the short term, but I'm optimistic in the long term, like many of you are. I think that if we take this opportunity now that they're starting to change their course without getting personal and doing all the good efforts that we're doing now, that may be the silver lining. I teach a lot of folks, military, police, policy folks across the spectrum, including campus folks, in terms of security, identifying lone wolves, and also strategic identification and mitigation of terrorist plots and so forth. And I'm struck by, even though many folks are disheartened, they're demoralized to some degree, there are a big segment among many of the folks I interface with, like you, that we need to be persistent now more than ever. We need to be doubling down on our efforts, even if it's 0.5% in whatever segment you're involved, whoever you represent. I think giving up now or even showing a hint of demoralized attitude would be a problem. And so my view is we need to really strike a positive tone and say, hey, we have an opportunity now. Things have gotten so bad. Hope is the last to die. We need to address this. I'm struck by a comment that was made at a funeral. Actually, I spoke of my mother's, and she spoke 5 languages, a great person for me. But I was struck by a comment that, you can live about 6 minutes without oxygen, maybe 6 days without food, more or less, but you can't live 6 seconds without hope. And that's where we are. So I think at all of our levels, we need to be more influential, more positive, and look creatively, which apparently is almost dead in the country, in terms of how can we creatively look at this, think outside the box, and foster that kind of thinking in influential folks in our circle. So that's just a short segment, but it's not quite as bad as you think. I deal with lots and lots of folks that in their heart of hearts, they're demoralized, but they haven't given up. So thank you, Ellie.
Thank you, Larry. So I have a few thoughts on the I have a few thoughts on my 2021 and of course 2022. This is a 2021 was a very, very interesting year. It was a continuation of COVID. The Biden administration has really taken COVID and doubled down on it and used it as an opportunity to advance the cause of socialism. But what's interesting is, as many have said, and I'm not saying anything new, but I think I'm putting it a little bit, I'm bringing it the full circle, I guess. What was very interesting, it was the Biden agenda, at least initially, was an anti-Trump agenda. That is, whatever Trump did is bad, and we must undo it. But in reality, what Biden has done was, listen, first of all, no president is perfect, and President Trump was far from perfect. That being said, what Joe Biden has successfully done in his short 11 complete months here has shown the success of many of the Trump policies. The idea of undoing the Keystone Pipeline and continuous time after time undoing Trump policies, whether it's at the border wall, at the southern border, has shown the validity of those policies. I think that getting past President Trump, taking a look at some of the agenda of the Biden administration, as most recently that social spending bill that did not make it through, thanks to a Democrat, Joe Manchin from West Virginia, it has shown that the highly partisanship of this administration, one where he couldn't get a single Republican, and in fact he lost at least one Democrat in the process. So it really shows what this administration has done here locally. Now, that being said, we now listen to the 2021 roundup from our fellows in Kurdistan and Israel and in England, in Europe, continental Europe, and from Spain. So we see that others are looking to the United States and have always looked to the United States, but in fact have looked to the United States and essentially in many ways, and again, I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, in many ways are putting the rise of China, the potential continued threats of Iran and Russia, and quite frankly, at the feet of the United States. So I believe that is very, very interesting, very telling for those people who question the influence of and the need for the United States. That it is United States is the leader that the world still looks to. So that I found to be quite telling. Looking to 2022, I am very optimistic. I believe in the resilience of the American people. This isn't the first time that we've been through something like this. This isn't, and I suspect if history is any barometer of the future, this won't be the last time that we have a year such as this. That being said, I firmly believe in the resilience of the American people. I firmly believe in the resilience of those people across the globe who share our Western values. That is important, and that, to be honest, is really growing. The number of people who are now seeing the value in Western values is growing exponentially. And I am optimistic about that. The one thing that we've seen that President Trump successfully did, and which President Biden has taken on that mantle, is to show American people and people across the globe how important it is to pay attention to policy. This isn't something that you happen to hear on the Sunday morning Sunday morning shows. This is something that is relevant to each and every one of us. One of us meaning what I call civilians. And it was evident in the 2021 elections, November elections, as we see those elections were the shift in those elections were significant, and it was specifically the impact that those politicians had from a policy perspective on those individual citizens' lives, whether it's on the school board all the way up to the governor. And that is very important. If we can see that in 2021, I firmly believe that we can see that in 2022 at a greater level. Whether it's Republicans or Democrats that ultimately win win Congress, the answer is that you're going to see more thoughtful elected officials. And the high partisanship that you see today is, in my estimation, going to be a thing of the past. it's important to understand that even with this administration, with the Biden-Harris administration, that if there is a shift in Congress, there's a lot that can be done from Congress, not to usurp the authority of the president, but to bypass the presidency, and that will have a great influence on global affairs. That is something that I have worked on along with our colleague Trent Franks, the congressman, in the past, and we have seen great success. Ellie was a staffer for Congressman Trent Franks, Ellie Stern, and he was involved in that as well. So that is my 2 cents on the future, on the past year and the future and the upcoming year. I am going to leave it on that high note because it is 1:29 and we are ending at 1:30. But I do want to thank everybody, all of our participants, all of the people watching this, and thank all of the supporters of the Gold Institute. If you haven't done so yet, you can always visit goldiis.org and show your support. This is, we can't do it without you. And quite frankly, the Institute can't do it without each and every one of our fellows and members. So thank you for joining us today, and thank you for your continued work at the Institute.
Right,
Thank
so
you.
long.
Merry
I'm gonna-
Christmas.
Happy
Merry
Christmas.
holidays, everybody.
Well, Merry Christmas, everyone.
Yeah.
Merry
Bye-bye.
Christmas, everyone. I'll post some comments afterwards when I get back from lunch. I've got some stuff to, okay?
Excellent. You can post them on the YouTube, on our YouTube page. This has been broadcast